Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have the complete delight and thrill to speak with Andrew Sweeny of Parallax. It is a complete delight. I really love speaking with him. And Michelle and I have the great honor of being part of a class at Parallax starting November 4th on Ivan Illich, Look at the Birds of the Air. And Ivan Illich is an extraordinary thinker who every time I think I've read all of him, I find out he wrote another book. And I was like, I need to read that. And it has innovative insights that are not repetitive from his previous works. He seems to have his finger on the pulse of what we need to be considering, and he seems to have been really far ahead of his time, which is remarkable. And he seems to have also been someone who was able to discern what mattered, like the ways to live life in a way that was alive, without being sucked up into various social pressures or concerns that in the end don't really matter that much. And that's part of the idea of look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap. And Ivan Illich is extraordinary. Michelle and I are just so happy to have the chance to work on him and to teach on him starting on November 4th. And today, I wanted to speak with Andrew Sweeny about Ivan Illich and ask him what does he find appealing about Ivan Illich, what got him into Ivan Illich, and why he has wanted to do this series on tools for conviviality. So I submit those questions to you, Andrew Sweeny, and I appreciate you so much being here today. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Daniel. And I hope everybody, or quite a number of people who listen to this, will sign up for your course, because I think it'll be extremely rich. And there's all kinds of material out there, which in your meditation and investigation of Ivan Illich, and I'm still going through that, and it's all extremely rich and potent. Ivan Illich is, one of those people who is like extremely underrated as a being, as a philosopher, as a thinker. One thing I've noticed is that people make reference to him here and there, and that they've been extremely influenced by him, but that he's not in the mainstream world of discussion like someone like Marshall McLuhan might be, or other people. That he sort of dropped off the map sometime in 1980. Mm. And I have the privilege of being, a relative of David Cayley, who recently wrote a huge biography of his work. And all through the 90s on CBC Radio in Canada, there were these long form, radio programs. And one of them was on Ivan Illich, and it was an interview between David Cayley and Ivan Illich. All kinds of people were interviewed, he interviewed, including, René Girard, and all kinds of people who are sort of massive figures, Northrop Frye, and in people's, in some people's worlds. And the most towering of all of those in my mind was always Ivan Illich. And it wasn't that he had the most coherent philosophy or the most extensive philosophy. It was I would say the fact that he walked the walk in a way that other thinkers that I read are often just in the realm of ideas, and he was in the realm of life right from the beginning. So he was sort of a radical thinker in critiquing all of our perennial institutions. In the 60s and 70s, he wrote a book called Deschooling Society and Medical Nemesis, and various books which were just a devastating critique of the culture and of institutions in general. And he also talked about the fact that we're moving into what he called the age of systems, or the internet age. And so he's one of those thinkers that he was wildly ahead of his time, and I was so lucky to read him, because it really helped me, bypass all of the more superficial, movements in thought that were happening, like new atheism and whatever, because like it's like jumping in the deep end, and once you jump in the deep end, and once you see something, as we were talking about at the break, you can't unsee it. So I think once you've really imbibed the works of Ivan Illich, you can't really you can't deny his insights somehow. They're too powerful.
Beautiful.
You might disagree with some of his thoughts, but that's fine. But you can't deny his deeper insights.
Oh, well, it's one thing to disagree with someone you can't take, you have to take him seriously. Like if you're going to disagree with Ivan Illich, you must earn it. You're going to have to do some work to think about and to go through, because he's not presenting, he doesn't assert. He gives you a very plausible case. He's like, well, look at this. Just look at this thing that's occurring and let's see how it affects people and how it unfolds. And if you look at what he points at, you may disagree with his interpretation, but you're certainly going to see the world differently. And that's a gift.
Yeah.
It makes me think, David Foster Wallace famously, where he has that "This is Water" speech, where he talks about these two young fish and they're swimming along, and this older fish comes along and he says, "The water's great today. Hey, boys," and keeps going. And the two younger fish look at one another and they're like, "What the heck is water?" And kind of the idea of that is when you're so surrounded and engulfed in something, it becomes invisible to you. And if this thing is organizing your action, if your entire life is determined in some respect or conditioned by this thing and you can't see it, that's pretty remarkable. And what David Foster Wallace is suggesting is that's what water is for fish. Their entire life is conditioned and inseparable from this water, and they may not even know it. And I think with Ivan Illich, very often when you talk about the age of systems, that's what he realizes. Like we're all swimming in the water of systems to the point where it becomes invisible. And he's not anti-system, but he is quite aware that when we're not conscious of how system influences us, the likelihood that it influences us badly skyrockets. And then the likelihood that power takes advantage of that invisible system also goes up. So we have to have a critical analysis and a critical eye of these different things. Well, of course, once you do that, though, like we said in the break, Nabokov at the end of his autobiography, Speak Memory, he has that part where he talks about one of those pictures where it's kind of an optical illusion where you have to stand in the room at the right angle and then you see the picture. And then once you see the picture, you can't unsee it. It's like, oh, there I see, like that famous one of the Spanish scene where he's playing the guitar, and if you have the right angle, you suddenly see the old man and the old woman looking at one another, but you could miss it forever. And Nabokov, with his Find the Sailor, he's like, once you see the picture, you can't unsee it. So likewise with Ivan Illich, once you see that there are, in fact, these systems that are organizing our action, you can't unsee it. And in some respects, that's terrifying. But in another way, that's a gift, because now you don't have to worry about going back to that way of life where you're going to be carried along by something that you didn't even know was there. And then I think Ivan Illich also understands that, like, if we're going to talk about political, economic, technological, or social change or possibilities, none of that will be possible unless you put your finger on this invisible system, this invisible way of things, rather it be in education, rather it be in medical, rather it be in environmental. Like if you can't see it, you can't make change because you don't even see the things that's causing the world to be the way that it is. And so then he gives us those eyes.
So he called it, I think, unquestioned certainties or something like that. And what one of his great gifts was to question those unquestioned certainties. And the way he did that was by being an outsider, in a sense, by going back to the 12th century and looking at the medieval world and seeing how different, people, how different we viewed the senses, or how different we viewed, technology, and how like a God-centric world, how different we view everything in the 12th century than how we view it today. And then, so as this outsider, and I think this is another reason why his work appeals to me the most, because I've always related more to the outsider than the insider. As an outsider, within his own tradition as a Catholic, even an outsider as a Catholic, but also an outsider as in the beginning of his career as a revolutionary, and then an outsider as a gender theorist, and then an outsider as in every possible way he was an outsider, and yet he was seeing the thing in its most profound sense on the inside. So that's what I always find is like he's as this outsider, as this 12th century man, as this Viennese person who spoke multiple languages and didn't really belong in the modern world, had the most insight into the modern world than anybody else. I mean, many of his insights were just as profound as Foucault and Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus and all these people who are very well known. And I don't know if he even read those people. I think he I think he just I think he just could I think he just had a way of seeing, which was very profound.
Well, I completely agree. And to your point as well, where he walked the walk, if I as a if I as a doctor say, hey, you need to run 2 miles every single day, and proceed myself never to run 2 miles every single day, I could be right, but there's some disconnect there. That's a problem, right? And what you see in Ivan Illich is he's saying, hey, there's something about modern society that disables man. He's big on this kind of disabling of humanity. So then he proceeds himself to live in a manner that is not so disabled. And that kind of coherency between thought and life, theory and practice, is extremely noble. And there's something about the human experience that makes it very easy to have ideas we don't live. The other thing I'll point to that I do think makes Ivan Illich so invaluable is this kind of philosophical historical method that he puts forth, where you're comparing, and Foucault does something similar. And I know, Thomas Hammelrick, Dr. Hammelrick, talks about anthropology, using that as historic or going to history. Bard, in his new book on Process and Event, goes through Zoroastrianism and shows that. I appreciate also at chapter 1 of that book how he goes through to lay out the vision so quickly. That was quite nice. And you see this kind of movement of the importance of history. And I think I sometimes wonder if there's something about human beings where we are attracted to axiomatic systems, where we like to, okay, here are the base assumptions, or here are the principles, and we build something on it. Ivan Illich's thought is more, I almost want to say, horizontal and episodic. Like what he's doing is comparing, well, let's look at medieval, let's look at oral traditions before writing. All right, let's look at written traditions after writing. What changed? What's very valuable about this is he makes a strong case that the change occurred, that you can have a whole lot of confidence that a change occurred. Whereas in philosophy, very often there are starting assumptions that you can't be so sure about. In fact, very often they turn out to be completely false or wrong, right? Because the whole system is built upon those assumptions that are not the case. Lurking in the background of so much Western thought is a concept of the subject as an isolated individual, right? There's so much talk now about ontological relation, or thinking kind of beyond this isolated atomic individual. Well, if that was wrong, there's a whole lot of philosophy that has to be real thought. But you see, what's so interesting about Ivan, Master Illich, dare I say, is because what he's paying attention to is the changes between the historic episodes. That makes his thought actually have a much stronger foundation, in my view, because it becomes hard to deny that that change did in fact occur. The assumptions could be wrong of various Western philosophical systems, but the change in the historic episode, well, that's there. Here's all the evidence. Here's all the evidence that shows it. And I sometimes wonder if that's one of the reasons why two things. One of the reasons why Illich is overlooked is because he's not doing philosophy from assumptions up, which seems to some reason humans like. We seem to like that, or have some sort of academic bias toward that. I'd be curious to think on that. So we don't like the historic method that he uses. And maybe we also don't like a philosophy that's going to call us to action. If you take Ivan Illich seriously, oh my gosh, you might have to change your life, right? Things might have to shift. You might have to see things differently. Whereas if we have a kind of axiomatic system, very often they help us interpret what's going on, but we don't need to think anew our occupation or our job or what we're doing. But all of that though also gives Illich a bit of a timeless character, precisely because his stuff is not based so much on assumptions, but paying attention to changes in historic episodes.
Yeah, and when he questions, for instance, schools or the medical system, in the 80s and 90s, and people thought he was a little bit crazy, but it's quite clear today that his critique of schools is much more transparent. It's transparently true that the educational system has become a bit of a racket. That medicine is often counterproductive and makes people sick, and iatrogenic diseases are probably the biggest form of death, and that we've become helpless creatures, bound to systems that we don't understand, and are becoming more and more what Yurchev would say is asleep. So there's one of the main points of his philosophy is being awake, being aware, and it could be being aware of the apocalyptic nature of the time, and that means the transition, but it also means looking the horrors directly as what they are. So again, all of these things that he was saying seem to be more relevant now than they were at the time, after COVID, after it just what his view seems to. There's an article, I think, that's saying that his time is sort of here. His time is, this is the time of Ivan Illich, like where most of what he was saying can be kind of like, we can look at it now and say, the medical system is just become so instrumentalized and inhuman, and again, he's not a fundamentalist. It's not like he's saying that we shouldn't go to a doctor or anything like that. He just points out the collective crime, basically, and unconsciousness of what is going on.
I think that's very well put. I mean, Nassim Taleb in Anti-Fragility spends a good portion of that book discussing this default of going to the hospital and medicine to get better, which then creates fragility versus anti-fragility, and that causes all sorts of trouble. And he goes through all the research. And I think you're also right when you talk about school. Well, basically what people do is you hear all the time the problems with school, documentaries like Waiting for Superman or The Lottery, or how now there's all this trouble with AI writing essays and different things. And you have people all the time. COVID is the most vivid example, but before that, you had the opioid crisis, you had pharmaceutical agencies taking advantage of people. Now it's very like, this has been going on for a very, very long time. But the problem is people go, well, there's no alternative. And what's so important about the later Illich is his examination of how the thought that there is no alternative is created by the system in its structure for you to think there is no alternative.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And that is the trick move that for me takes him to another level, because it's one thing to say there's a problem with the school system, but it's an entirely another matter to examine, why do we think that we have no alternative? Where does that notion come from that then organizes our activity? He does this work he'll talk about shadow work, for one, on how the entire economic system requires something that's outside of wage labor, that then simultaneously requires a not acknowledging that as productive, this thing outside of it that makes it possible. Mm-hmm. Likewise, the entire school system requires a space outside of it to make it possible, that then acts like it doesn't need it. And the very fact, though, it needs this outside space then would suggest an alternative is possible, because there seems to be real work and real learning that occurs in this outside space, without which the inside space of the systems and institutions would not be possible. But there's this move where you have to never acknowledge that outside space, because if you do, you would notice there would be an alternative and things.
But the outside space, the shadow, is what we're kind of living in and what we're doing here. Right now, we're talking. We're not getting paid for it directly. It's not employment that we're not employed by somebody to do this. So again, the shadow work has become huge. The right to useful unemployment, another beautiful idea of his, becomes extremely clear in the burnout society. What do we do with our time? What should we do with our time? And his idea was moving from these sterile spaces where that dehumanize us and turn us into what he calls ciphers. We can move from becoming virtual beings, cipher beings, into convivial spaces, which happen in the shadow, but it's actually where the light, if I could be poetic about it, the light is where where the shadow is.
That's exactly right. I think, as to just kind of look ahead, I think the more and more that AI replaces wage labor, if we use that term that he'll talk about, the more and more shadow work will become the human work. And so we have to overcome our subconscious and cognitive biases against shadow work in order to be human, because otherwise we're just going to be kind of the great filter, I've heard Raven call it, that will occur as these technological pressures occur, will lead to great psychosis and great trouble, and they already will. But
and they are, yes.
yeah, that's exactly right. But that would mean, in order to avoid that great filter, that great psychological pressure, we are going to have to shine light and value what for a very long time has been shadow work, and now we've been habituated to associate with meaningless and a waste of time. Suddenly we're going to have to change our habits and association and see that as valuable. And if we don't, well, then basically we're going to just be forced to all be disabled in the way that Ivan Illich says, because the things that we can do are going to be increasingly the shadow work. And if that's not an option for us, the only things that will be left to do are the things we can't do. And thus we'll have this kind of disabled, dehumanizing way of life that Illich is so concerned by.
And also, it should be pointed out, we talk about Illich because we're kind of shy about speaking of these things in the present secular age, that he was a man of faith. And so what that means is that divine is what inspires us. What is most divine is what inspires us. And what is most real is what inspires us. And what is most high and what is most embodied is what inspires us. So it's not possible to live in any other way. If you're tuned into that, and I think he was. Many other thinkers and philosophers, live in the realm of concepts, but don't live in the realm of faith.
I think that's very well put. To me, it's very important. Like, there's a lot of talk on the meaning crisis, nihilism, and different things. For me, these are primarily motivational problems. Because, so for example, there are lots of Christians or religious people that are actually suffering from the meaning crisis. They believe in a world that God exists and it's meta, but they don't have any motivation to care. And so you have to, and for me, I'll talk a lot about beauty. This is where whatever you find meaningful must also be beautiful, because if it is not beautiful, it won't attract you, ergo incubate motivation. Motivation, I really am big on thinking about it. And I don't want to come up with another crisis name or anything. I think the meaning crisis has been a very useful phrase that has gotten a conversation going that's very, very important. And meaning can mean motivation. It can have a motivational element to it. So I'm not critiquing it in that sense, but I think it's just very, very important. Like when we go back to Aristotle, when we go back like teleology, telos, and all these things, these are all tied to ideas of what? First mover, final calls, efficient calls, like movement. There's a movement to things. I know that Dr. Viveki has been emphasizing with Neoplatonism the notion of form as more like formulation, the formulation principle, the movement and unfolding of a thing according to its essence, et cetera, so forth. Now, you don't have to posit a kind of transcendent teleology, but there's this notion of a kind of unfolding in things that can occur. Well, these are all forms of meaning that are indivisible from a movement, ergo a motivation. And you see, tying the idea of divinity to motivation and inspiration is so critical. And that's why on the first course, we're going to talk about Illich motivation. So I'm glad you brought this up. Like divinity, ole, the motivation, captured in this sort of inspiration, the Damien, the muse. Like, this is what meaning must have for us. Meaning must be a muse. If meaning is not a muse, then it can't have this propulsion. And what Illich realizes is that so much of the unquestioned certainties make it impossible for us to have a muse, other than what the system is the muse, per se. The system, and that would be what I call, that's the extrinsic motivation.
Well, it's an anti-muse in a way, because it's not really a muse, because it's not inspiring you to anything novel. It's just mechanical, just moving you along. But there's something also I wanted to say about him being a man of faith, is not an ordinary religiosity, which he was very critical of. In other words, he was critical of people having propositional beliefs about things. For example, care, like he critiqued the institutions of charity as being institutional care, which removes us from the direct contact with the other. Or with the stranger, or with the Samaritan in the ditch, to use the biblical example. So he was again, an outsider to the Catholic. He was a Catholic, deeply religious Catholic, at the same time as being an outsider to the and almost excommunicated, or at least definitely he experienced a kind of what do you call it in the Middle Aged when they put people on some kind of a trial? What do you call that? The
Inquisition.
he was definitely subject to an inquisition within his own tradition
Yeah.
for his beliefs, which means again, it's not an ordinary religiosity where you have a bunch of propositional beliefs about reality and you just dogmatically proclaim them. It was, he called it enfleshment. It was embodied, enfleshed, behaviors and being able to experience, the divinity in the other in the moment.
I think that's magnificent. Well, the problem is with propositional knowledge is you actually, funny enough, don't have to think. It seems like you have to think, but you actually don't. You just have to memorize and mechanically go through. And there's something about the brain that actually doesn't want to think. We tend to associate the brain with thinking, and it's all in the business of thinking. But no, the brain is more like a frenemy. It's more of your friend and your enemy. It's actually in the business of saving energy. So it will take something like love your neighbor, which, Jesus can intend as a very active thing. You're always open to the unknown and the surprise. And the brain will just very slowly and gradually over the decades turn that into a propositional phrase that you can define neighbor as person next door, living there who you've seen often, and loving them equals inviting them to dinner once a week. Okay, no longer need to think about that. I just need to do that. And the brain gradually moves us in this direction if we're not paying attention to it. And in a very funny way, a critique of propositional knowledge is actually a defense of thinking, like real thinking. The funny thing is that we associate, well, because of the school system teaching us that creating the habit of associating thinking with memorization and, as you know, I've said, being good at trivia, basically. Funny enough, what Illich realized is that school was actually, in the name of teaching thinking, was teaching people not to think, because it was just having them memorize and regurgitate and follow. What Ivan would show to us is that, Christianity, the great best of things becomes the inversion. When Christianity moved from being a very active thinker, being open to the guy on the side of the road, always having the piece of bread and bed ready for the man who comes upon the house, never outsourcing it to someone else, well, then it was very good. But through time, because the frenemy brain doesn't like active thinking, it moves to a just do X, Y, and Z, and then you're a Christian. You can check it off your box and you're done. Well, now religion is no better than the system. It's no better than a machine. And what
just another mechanistic system, like all the other mechanistic systems that we rely on in order to, be asleep.
100%.
Gurdjieff had considered sleep to be sin. Like what we call sin is actually sleep. It's like not becoming awakened to both the horror and the beauty of existence, or the intensity of existence. So I feel that Ivan Illich's work is a radical protest against that mechanicalness in religion and in all institutional, modes of being. And when you talk about thinking, it made me think about Heidegger, and Heidegger's idea of thinking was not a conceptual overlay of any. It was revealing, something that was already there, and deepening revelatory process. And then I tied that to what Ivan Illich would talk about being the prophecy. He said the age of prophecy is over. It's all there. Everything's there. Something needs to be revealed. And so we tend to think of thinking as like writing some kind of new code, but rather than revealing the depth or intrinsic depth, which is already the case.
I really like the notion of sleep as sin. That's really great. There is a recurring theme in the New Testament about, stay awake, don't be asleep, don't be asleep. Also, I think you could associate sleep with Hannah Arendt's banality of evil. The banality of evil that she associates with the condition of Nazism is one great thoughtless sleep, where you're just going through the mechanical. And it would seem that there's something about human beings that naturally moves from creation to causality, like causality being very mechanical, creation being much more organic. And you have to really, really be paying attention and really do have to actively stay awake to not drift from creation into causation. If you grant me that language here, it's very, very difficult. But if we don't do it, the cost is, well, being mechanical, being a robot. I always like, a lot of people ask, is it Huxley or Orwell? Are we going to be imprisoned by pleasure or by force? I think the best description is actually Kafka, because in Kafka, oppression is a result of you, by your own thinking, organize your own oppression because you don't follow the logical end of where your thinking is taking you. Like in Joseph K. with the trial, everything that happens to him, he leads himself into because he's doing what's rational or what he's supposed to do. And because he does that, he's always messing up. And so what you see in Joseph K., and I'd have to elaborate on it, but if you grant me it here, you see a movement from creation to causation. And in the end, like when they're about to stab him at the end, they actually turn the knife toward him and like, hey, aren't you going to take the knife and do this? Because this has been all your self-organizing action. At the beginning, he rings the bell to call the police into the bedroom. They don't just barge in or different thing. What you see in Kafka is this awareness of how we participate in our own enslavement, our own oppression. And I think that's what Illich is very aware of. And basically, I would associate that with sleep and participating in the movement from creation to causation. And what Illich really wants to bring to our attention is unquestioned certainties always move us from creation to causation. They always make us Joseph K. Now, the things themselves of which we have unquestioned certainties about, they actually could be good if we had active thinking about them. But the moment we start having unquestioned certainties, the systems that could perhaps have a good potential become they're not limited. Mr. Illich is so big on setting limits, like Alex Ebert in Freak Theory is all about this notion of without limits, things become cancerous. They can't have new thresholds cannot be crossed, and they become very problematic. Well, likewise for Mr. Illich, the problem with systems is they bring with them these unquestioned certainties that then leads us to being unable to limit them and thus make sure they are organized toward the human, toward the creation versus the causation. But if we were conscious of them, and that then to me would bring up Heidegger, I always think Heidegger is at his best when he's talking more so about clearing, when he's talking about thought as a certain sort of holding to let being unfold. Toward the end of his life, he's almost like, maybe we should even use the word being. He almost gets to the point where he wants to throw away talks about being and really more so emphasize annihilation, clearing, these kind of openings by which things can come forth that are there, that are already there. But if they come forth, they're going to come forth in a new way. The clearing actually creates a new possibility because just like in Hegel, the repetition is always a sublation. You never get a pure repetition. And Thomas Wynne is very good on that. But I definitely would see like this tendency to move from creation to causation. That is a movement to sin, and that the religious principles should be keeping us from doing that.
Yeah, a movement away from life, in a sense. Well, it's interesting because he also talked about how we create a concept out of life and then worship that as an idol, which actually is another kind of sin because, life at all costs, right? A bit like the COVID, right? We're not allowed to die. We're not allowed to, we're not. The art of death has been forgotten, and we're trying to preserve life, at all costs. But the living quality, is always something beyond karma, beyond causation. That's and he's very clear about that. That's often that's how he sort of interprets Christianity. Is the advent of Christ is sort of the end of causation, the end of this mechanical causation. Whether you're a Christian or not, it's an interesting interpretation of what what Jesus was up to. It's like, okay, reverse everything, it reversed the entire process of make the God man the lowliest man, make the holy person the scapegoat instead of the hero, reverse the entire thing, break through the lie of causation, because nothing is caused. That's this is basic Buddha's wisdom as well. Nothing is caused. There is no causation. There is no. I mean, fundamentally, there's no such thing. That sounds like a radical statement to say, but I think that is the case.
No, I mean, I can't help but bring up my beloved David Hume here, because what David Hume was trying to say is that he's trying to say you can never arrive from constant conjunction to a law of causation, not because the billiard ball won't move when it hits with the next, but because the moment you go from billiard balls hitting to law of cause and effect, you no longer need life. You now have a law. That's the truth, and it becomes deeper and more real than the billiard balls themselves. It is so critical. A lot of people read David Hume as being some sort of jokester. He's just kind of playing around. When he says that we don't really have laws of nature, we have common life, he's literally trying to defend common life from laws of nature, because causation for him always manifests in the particular, and he wants us always open to the unknown. Because this is the thing, the moment you believe that you can predict reality according to laws of nature, well, then you can be a king or a government thousands of miles away, controlling towns and different areas without being there, because they follow laws of probability or nature or whatever. So he's trying to put binds and limits and brackets on power. And we have to remember, he's a Scot. Well, what do we do? The British Empire, the United Kingdom, these different things we have occupation, they are very aware. And he's extremely aware of a historian, how it doesn't take long to move into a kind of hard notion that the law of cause and effect to power. And I think Illich is right there as well. And, we could even get into, the speculative realists of after finitude, where, Quentin there is basically saying with this radical contingency could be the case. Are we so sure that what we call the laws of nature are not just the habits of this particular universal configuration? I know Alexander Bard will talk about that. In all honesty, and then I'll give it back to you, we obviously can't say for sure either way, but simply from how it changes your life to not believe in a kind of hard causation, it's very beneficial not to believe that, because that right there can help you be more creative and more human and more organic, to lean in the direction of thinking of the laws of nature as more so habits of nature. That can be more enlivening, because it's very easy to go from belief in laws of nature to systems that are programmed in line with those laws. Then you have the disabling humanity that Ivan Illich talks about. There's a real advantage to believing in habits of nature over laws of nature.
Habits, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that somebody once told me that in the Genesis, in the beginning God created so there's a beginning, and then this is a causation, right? But it's a poor translation, so it should be in beginninglessness. So something arises from the beginninglessness. It's not that there was nothing and there was something. It's that things arise spontaneously from beginninglessness, from emptiness, from void, from and simultaneous things just appear. So rather than there's this radical story of causation. But I guess we use causation, and we have laws and we have causations, but they're not as primary as the uncaused or the apophatic or the. I mean, I'm rambling here a bit. I was thinking about how in the Jewish tradition you have the oral Torah and you have the written Torah, and I heard somebody say the oral Torah is just what spontaneously speaks truth from nowhere, and then the written Torah is all the weird rules that you follow if you're a religious Jew. And even those are not they're not rational, they're not caused. They're supposed to be, God said this and we follow it because God said it, not because there's this because we have faith, not because there's some sort of scientific architecture that we could ever understand.
Well, I think it's very well put. In Genesis, the bird, some people say the Holy Spirit flutters over the waters. So there's these cosmic waters that are pre-existing. And the issue is that nothing in Genesis seems to be pregnant. It seems to be a kind of apophatic, out of which creation occurs. And the other thing that should be noted, when we read Genesis, it does seem like things are just kind of creatively popping in. It seems like cause and effect because we say day one, day two, but it's not really written as if day one causes day two. It's more like day one is the precondition that makes possible day two, not a direct cause and effect. It's the language of Genesis is much more of a kind of manifestation versus causation. The problem is we remember it as, oh, day one calls day two, calls day three. No, it's more like worded like day one is just kind of a category under which the manifestations occurred for that day, then day two, and then day three. But that just goes to show you right there how difficult it is not to read the present moment into ancient texts or to read into previous books or historic episode. And so when Illich puts it,
well, in the Kabbalah, everything arises. There's all these sephirot, which are the divine attributes, and they arise simultaneously, and you can map those on the days of Genesis. And but it's a tree. It's a you know, everything is, or it's a body. It's not a linear story.
Oh, that's exactly right. Well, causation, cause and effect is more like a model than a law. You know how you were saying earlier, and Illich's right about this, we tend to create a concept of X and then worship the concept more than X. Causality is more so an idea that is useful. You know, it's like that George Box notion of saying, you know, all models are wrong, but some are useful, which is very true. You know, models, there's always this tension in modeling, like in computer science. If I have a perfect model of the bookcase right there, well, it is the bookcase, so it's useless. But then if it's too unlike the bookcase, it's also useless. So there's this middle ground between underfitting and overfitting that has to be found, right? Well, causation seems to be a model that tends to, most of the time, hit a pretty nice sweet spot between overfitting and underfitting. But because it tends to work so well, it's very easy to then lift it up to being something a priori versus a model that is very useful. It becomes very easy to treat. It becomes very easy to treat causation as necessary, as opposed to very, very, very often the case, which is a slight difference, but it makes a world of difference, because that very, very, very often the case leaves open just a little opening so that creation and possibility can burst forth. And that little opening is also a place where the human can locate themselves and remain human and avoid becoming over mechanical. And also that little space changes the meaning of everything. Because if everything is causation, well, then everything is causation. But if you say 90% of explanations are causal, oh, wait, there's a 10% opening there that changes the meaning of everything. Now everything is different in character because there's a creative element that's part of it.
Yeah. So when the when Samaritan meets the stranger in the ditch, this is a break. This is a break from all causality. It's a break from all image. He makes a free choice to pull this person out of the ditch, which doesn't make sense from any causal point of view. And it's just a moment of it's a pure moment of I guess you would say communion and even horror, but it's a pure moment. It's that's really, I mean, this is what the part of Illich thought, his later thinking, which I thought was profound. Like his earlier thinking is very profound from the point of view of social theory, and his later thinking is profound from the point of view of from the point of view of actually leading, a life of faith, so to speak.
Oh, I completely agree. There's a few things. When Illich says that, there's no need for prophets, I sometimes wonder, sometimes in some Christian thought, there's a difference between prophet and visionary. And the end of prophets would not be the end of visionary. And because now we have to envision what it means. If Jesus was the peak of history and the Holy Spirit is alive, well,
that's where I disagree with Illich, actually.
Sure. But there is a difference between prophecy in the sense of how Jesus will manifest through history in new ways that are unpredictable, and prophecy being the coming of a Messiah. Like, it would seem like there's plenty of room, even in like when Paul's writing, for visionaries and prophets who are more like visionary than predicting a historic episode of, say, the Messiah coming. And see, the issue is, though, we're not going to be visionaries if we're stuck in just causation. Visionary creation requires vision. And that's where the call for being a visionary, like basically Illich's philosophy requires you then to have vision, because you have to be, one, seeing the system, and then two, seeing how creativity might break through that system, or seeing how the guy you happen upon on the side of the road is the neighbor who you need to respond to. So Illich is screaming that we need to be visionaries. And the other thing,
well, but he's also saying it's also in the most simple things, right? It's also in just friendship.
Yes.
Philia. It's not in some grand vision. It's in the most sort of nakedness of two people together. That's where I think he finds that's the redemption, rather than, you know, that so I think his critique of prophecy today would be inflation or inflationary visionary, like trying to create some sort of system, you know, that would save everything. But on the but in the way I sort of in a way disagree with him is, you know, that there's this guy Jesus in the past and he's the only one, and then everything else is just a commentary on that. I feel there's possibilities for new prophets to arise in any time, in any culture, in any place, in any world, but anyway, there is something beautiful about, you know, even the things that he says that one disagrees with are.
Oh, sure. I mean, as a Christian, if you see Jesus as one person of the Trinity, that's going to give them a special position in history. But there is a danger. There is a big danger in basically saying, well, Jesus is the peak of history, so all we need to do is be like Jesus, as if that would not require rethinking the model relative to the present moment, and it would not manifest in new ways that would not have been seen before. Like, that is, exactly. There's still, even if you say Jesus is the center of history, because I've been actually, I'll have to put it out, trying to think of this notion of what is progress in that model, because it does seem like things are different. Are you saying there's no progress after Jesus? Well, that actually, and I'm not saying Illich thinks that way. Well, that would basically mean the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts is kind of like, I don't know, just kind of some extra thing you throw in. There's a real danger in a Christianity that makes the presence of the Holy Spirit not a continuation of the working of God that's just as equal as every other episode. There's always been a danger in Christianity of treating the Torah as not important as the New Testament, and then treating the life of Jesus as more important than the Holy Spirit. Well, in a Trinitarian model, all three are equally God, right? So you got to avoid that danger. And I think actually the problem you just brought up speaks to a Christianity that is not treating the Holy Spirit as equally God as Jesus. Even if you think that Jesus has a special function to say the Holy Spirit, and arguably every person of the Trinity in Christianity has a different function. It's very problematic, though, if you treat that function as necessarily more important than the function of the Holy Spirit. That seems to be very alive and doing very different things, and you have to be open to. And actually, Pentecostalism in America, I think, has grown from a failure to theologically think this problem through. And because this problem has not been thought through, this situation, more than problem, has not been thought through correctly, a lot of Pentecostalism has unfortunately been captured by totalitarianism, fascism, and different things, because it hasn't thought this through to the degree it needs to be. And I think that's actually an important work for Christian thinkers today. And if they don't do it, then you get all of the pathologies you're seeing in American Pentecostalism that has to be addressed. But I also
he said the corruption of the best is the worst. So he would view the Christianity, he saw the corruption of Christianity very clearly. He also said it was the best, you know, which kind of alienates people from other traditions. But at the same time, you know, it's a statement that rings very true, is that the corruption of Christianity is, well, I guess the corruption of Islam is the worst too, as we're seeing, and the corruption of, you know, all of the religions, when they become yeah, mechanical in the sense that we've been talking about is the worst. Better not have a religion at all. Better stay the fuck away from any religion than get involved in that racket.
That speaks to your recent talk with Gary, where he was saying like, hey man, if you're gonna see reality is real, I don't know about this. Don't read this book. Once this opens up, it can be a problem. And one of the issues is, in fact, that when religion is popularized, the likelihood of people getting involved in something that opens them up to the craziness of reality is high, and them not having the training to handle it. So it becomes really likely that the religions kind of pervert in this way.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're going to be spontaneous, you need this very deep training, because Illich was very deeply trained, in contemplation and all of these things, from the Catholic Church. So he was able to criticize, the Catholic mode of institutional modernity, but also being very deeply trained. Yeah, I think that's very important.
Oh, I think Pentecostalism has not been trained. I associated, when you look, one of my favorite metaphors is the hip hop cipher. And my friend Bernard and I would talk about this a lot. When you look at a cipher, it seems like they're just able to do it. They're just able to come off the dome, these lines, and it just keeps going and going. Just like when an artist...
What's that, a hip hop cipher? Is it like an AI hip hopper or something? Or what is it?
It's like a cipher is when you have a circle of freestyle rappers and one of them starts a verse and then someone else picks up. Nothing is planned. No one knows, but they're able to just keep going and going and going. It requires such speed of thought and skill that it's unbelievable, but none of it is planned. And yet it's only possible because everyone is prepared. It looks like it's random, though, but it's not random at all. The reason the cipher is possible is because everyone comes to the table incredibly prepared.
That's really deschooling society.
100%.
Because those people are working from the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit, or the most intense spirit, to create something, and they're training their acuity and their verbal acuity towards expression in such an intense way that it's like it's impossible for... You look at it and you're like, whoa, that's incredible. Like, there's so many things like that seem impossible from our perspective. Behind that that always is a sort of like the appearance of magic with intense training behind it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, to me, basically, the cipher should be the central metaphor of all scene organization thinking today, because the cipher is going to be the model. And I think it speaks to Benito Roy's self-organization. I think it speaks to the emergence. Underground theory talks, David in his great philosophy portal was talking about a new scene. The cipher is the organizational and social structure that is what would follow in a decentralized network like Web 3.0, Bitcoin, and all these people talk about, that would address the concerns of belonging again one, where givens have been lost and the psychological tensions of releases have taken over. After belonging again one, Pentecostalism is a very appealing option, and Pentecostalism could be a better form of Christianity if people were trained for it. But the problem is, if they're not trained for it, then it becomes extremely bad. But likewise, faced with the psychological tension after belonging again, the other thing is to try to go back to givens, ergo totalitarian nostalgia or totalitarian utopianism. Well, the only way to kind of navigate that middle zone, and I have to make this case, and hopefully I do, is basically to think in terms of a hip hop cipher, because you put it very well. That is magic. It's not magic, and yet it is magic, right? And that is what we have to think. Like, to me, if we take seriously you put it very well, deschooling, we take seriously the liminal web, what we're doing here, and Peter Lindbergh, he talks about Joseph Piper, leisure, spaces of leisure, the spaces outside of wage labor, the shadow work, the space outside of the system, if it is to sustain itself and prove to be the necessary alternative to the system that is needed to actually be alternative and give rise to a different way of doing things, it's going to be like a hip hop cipher. Now, what exactly that looks like, what the economic modeling of all that is, has to go forth, but it's going to be very, very, very similar.
Well, what's the center of gravity of a hip hop cipher? That's my only question.
That the magic itself, the event, the art, the production, the ability.
Art for the sake of art?
Basically, yes, it has to be a thing for itself. And that's the key to the cipher, why I like so much, is does it make a product? Because that's always the problem. A system is possible wherever it's capable of creating a product that's externalized from the people involved. In one sense, you could film a cipher, but the product is actually the dwelling of the people in the cipher itself.
In the moment, in the stage. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I always thought that music, I mean, this is a cliche to say that music, live music is music.
Yes.
Recorded music is an artifact of music. And it's interesting but you know, but albums and records are disposable, in a sense, right? You know, you can only listen to the Beatles albums a number of times and then you're bored of them. Maybe you come back to them to get a sense of nostalgia. But even that, it's the moment that matters, the moment that it came out, and the moment that you're dancing at a party, or when it came out. And so I think that the music of the future will always be live, will have to be live, and it will have to be a story or a communication between the performer and the artist, and something in between. You know, I remember a musician I like very much saying that he's playing to the space that's directly in front of him, that's between the audience and himself. It's almost like the divine is there in that in between space of the artist and his creation.
Oh, well, the Bible's, where two or more are gathered, I'll be there. The Holy Spirit is in this kind of spirit between space. Yeah. Well, that's a cipher. There's a between space. And what is bringing the weird thing is basically what unifies the cipher is an apophatic lack, is an apophatic center. There's nothing in the middle of the cipher, and yet everything is in the middle of the cipher at the same time. To me, the distinction, which the class will elaborate on, between being prepared and planning leads to systems. Being prepared makes possible ciphers. And that's why we have to unplan our lives, because when they're planned, they are then systemized and susceptible to being captured in a Deleuzian sense by systems. Whereas if we're prepared, that allows a decentralized possibility that is not anarchistic. That is not anarchy in the sense of, because it's one thing if you say,
well, that's why I asked you the question of what's the center of the hip hop thing. That's where it becomes just mere anarchy. So how is that held together? Well, there's a self-organizing quality, but is there a story there? Is there a narrative?
Oh, no, that's an excellent question. I think basically we're seeing emerge online a lot of different narrative possibility. Vervaeke and Dr. Henriquez are talking about transcendental naturalism. We have Wolfgang Smith talking about vertical causation. We have notions of apophatic lack. You have this reemergence of Eastern Orthodoxy. It's very interesting. You're almost saying...
You have to have a narrative. You have to have a narrative guiding principle within what you're calling the cipher.
Oh, yeah.
That would be my point, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're seeing in the same way that you've almost had, in Christianity, there's been denominations, like different denominations. It's very interesting because I personally, I'm very interested in belonging in kind of the system structure of the cipher. But the narrative, I think we're seeing a lot of people doing various narrative works on these possibilities. You could talk about metamodernism, integral theory, emergentism, all these different things. And I think what you'll see is a lot of people will choose different ones based on their personality and interest, but all of them will actually be unified by pointing to something apophatic or something that cannot be systemized. Because if you say something like Wolfgang Smith talking about vertical causation, well, the vertical causation is kind of apophatic because it itself is beyond quantification. It is what makes possible quantification, but it itself is beyond quantification. Likewise, if you start talking about apophatic, well, that's something that makes possible the quantifiable, but it's also outside of quantification. So all of them kind of have a unifying form, if you grant me that term, between them, but there are different narrative structures around that, barred and process and event. If we have the notion of the event, I think we're seeing online many people doing the works on these different narratives. Now, if we want to ask the question of which one is most true, that might be asking like which religion is right, and that might not be that might be a question that is asked, and I'm not saying all narratives are the same because they are different, but I think we're going to have those kind of debates emerge.
Well, I think, well, I was listening to Mark Gaffney talk about moral equivalency in terms of, what's going on in the Middle East right now. And all the narratives are not equal.
No,
Like kill all the Jews is not a very,
no.
it's not equal narrative to whatever the narrative of Israel is. I mean, they're not an equal narrative, you know. So there's a question. If we just say that all narratives are equal, that's wrong, because some narratives are closer to the truth than others. Maybe no narrative can encompass the truth, but some narratives are more resident with, I keep using religious words just to piss people off, the divine, so.
Well, actually, one of the great problems that the world has had has been the impossibility of what Hunter calls substantive democracy. And what he means by that is democracy that debates first principles, like deepest principles. So, for example, how indeed do you have democracy between, say, a Christian and an atheist? It's possible, but actually not really, because they have entirely different first principles. They have to basically never discuss their first principles and instead just debate the accidental issues, right?
They don't have a shared story.
They don't have a shared story because the first principles are outside the realm of discussion. What's interesting to me is actually all of these different narratives online, you could discuss the first principles and it not necessarily be outside the realm of debate, because the first principles are not based on sense of, say, for example, something utterly transcendent, like a God that has nothing to do with reality, that by definition is outside of rational discourse. Yeah, there may be something ultimately apathetic about emergentism or transcendental naturalism, but you could debate the character of that apathetic because it is participating in nature. So actually what gives me kind of hope is that whereas the problem of first principles has tended to lead to a very crude relativism that has not been productive, what we might be seeing is that these new narratives actually make possible discussions on first principles that do not automatically deconstruct them or lead to personal backlash, because the characters of the first principles are participating in nature and therefore the realm of discourse or conversation. It gives me a kind of hope, actually.
That there's a common, even though there's a difference, but there's also something holding all the narratives together in some sense. So there is a shared value somewhere. Maybe we don't know how to define it fully, but it is there.
Oh, yeah. Well, you got someone like Habermas in Communicative Rationality who's trying to get back to a kind of enlightenment. And he's like, well, the only thing we can discuss is material realities, because we can all look at this pen and say, hey, this pen is a pen, so we can debate that. So he's trying to locate democracy in materiality. The problem is we don't all necessarily share interpretation. So materiality can't tell you what it means, right? Like Cardinal Newman once said, words don't tell you what they mean, which is kind of hilarious, but it's true, right? So the problem is, even if Habermas has a point on the shared ground of materiality, that shared ground is not enough to do the heavy lifting of interpretation.
Well, a story isn't materiality, is it?
Correct.
There's a shared ground of story, but that's not a shared ground of materiality.
No, it's a shared...
Materiality is just stuff. It's just things. It's just, it's not... it's not spirit.
No, and that's
again, it would be like it would be like just believing in Jesus without the Holy Spirit, or it would be like only looking at one part of the Trinity, or because I think that that's why I go back to the religions, because they always, even if they're not explicit in explaining everything can be found there in terms of what could be explained. Because there's enough resonance and mystery and depth, and the fact that these images have endured over time, that we can always find something there that is real. So, so the fact that materiality is the only ground we can share, it's like, doesn't tell me anything particularly.
Well, no, and that's why the Enlightenment or the notions of basing democracy on positivism or hard material or empiricism have failed. They have not worked. And so now you have
they failed.
You've had this big backlash then against conversation, debate, because it doesn't seem like it works. Well, here's the thing. Where the religious people have come up and said, well, you can't base democracy on pure rationality, there's still this problem of, well, then how do you discuss transcendental first principles between religions? And Hunter and Berger and all these people are like, well, you can't. Here's the thing. All of these a lot of the narratives that are emerging on the liminal web are changing the character of materiality that we all share to include the transcendental dimension. And therefore, there's a bind for the
John Vervaeke does that, yeah.
Yes. And so now we do all share the materiality, and that materiality binds to some degree the transcendental possibility, but the materiality does not erase the transcendental possibility. So then what you have is a range of discussion. It's not unlimited, which would make it impossible. It's kind of like cows in a field. There's a free range where everyone can be different, but it's not all over the place, because if it's all over the place, you can't have discussion. So now you have the possibility of discussion, ergo the possibility of democracy not collapsing, even if there's something, it depends on what you mean by democracy, but let's just say democratic debate or discussion. That becomes possible without being reductionist, because that's the big problem. Like there's so much, everyone talks about the problems of reductionism now, right? Like reducing people to atoms and so on and so forth. Now, I think we have to be careful. There is a place for reductionism. You do want to use that as a model in the same way that there's a place for causation as a model. But I get the point. When you make reductionism a religion, basically, there's a problem. Well, likewise, one of the reasons why democratic discussion has been impossible is because there's been no way to do it in a coherent manner without reducing everyone to a materiality that doesn't entail the transcendent, and that screws you all up. But now what you have are new framings of where the materiality can include the transcendent. Therefore, there are actually things to debate about the materiality that are not reductionistic, that make possible many narratives because of this kind of apathetic middle in the center of the cipher.
Yeah. I mean, I think Moneta was pushing for, what did she call, hyper-paganism or something like that? The more material view of the more embodied view. And then I see other people pushing transcendence, like Andrew Cohen, who I spoke to recently, pushing enlightenment and transcendence, and then, but I guess the non-dual view would include both. I don't know if maybe that's too crude for what you're saying, but that's where I tend to say, okay, there's the transcendent and the emergent are non-dual. They're not two. They're not separate. They emerge simultaneously in kind of a, as a unity. But that's just basic, mystical non-dual philosophy. It's not. I don't know. Then that becomes a problem as well, because you can't make distinctions, and so the non-dual view gets kind of like flaky. Am I making sense here? I feel.
Yes. Well, this would be the grounds of the conversation, because then what you have to do is you go through each possibility of this center of the cipher, this apathetic space, and say, okay, is this elegant, or does it rely on too many distinctions that in the model may work, but it becomes too complicated, or it has too many distinctions that get muddled, so it becomes less useful. You can compare sort of a version of Christianity that emphasizes the Trinity with something that's more like emergentism, and say, okay, which one of these actually can help us practice? Because here's the rubric. Which then can kind of manifest in your practical life, which leaves you open to the stranger on the side.
None of them
are
ultimately true. They're just, as you say, they're I remember just a Buddhist teacher saying that, none of this Buddhist stuff is true. It's not, none of it is true. Absolutely not true. It's just a skillful means. It's just there has to be something transparent about all these theories. We can never fully concretize them or make them solid or reify them and create some ultimate sort of system. Because there is a lack, there is an apophatic heart to all of this. There is an emptiness to it. It's all no thing. Nothing can be defined fully. So each system which you create and tend to believe as being the ultimate system is, as soon as you start to believe it's the ultimate system, you're wrong.
Well, for me, to help understand that extremely important point you just made, looking at the hip hop cipher can be very useful. Because before a cipher started, if I said, hey, Mr. Sweeny, I have a model that's going to predict everything that's going to come out of that cipher, you wouldn't have to look at it for 1 second with saying, there's no way that's true. There's no way that's going to work. There's no way you can predict everything that's going to come out of the cipher before the cipher goes on. You know, you say you wouldn't even want to. If I were to come along and say, okay, I can't predict what's going to come out with the cipher, but here's a rubric for why the cipher is possible. You would look at it, but by definition, unless I had a surveillance state to check every book that everyone in that cipher has read, every piece of music, all it could be was general. Like here's, the cipher is possible because you have people that have listened to music, studied music, they've read books, they have it's like, okay, but that's really general. And that's true, but it's also leaving out all of the particular details that make the cipher possible. And yet the very fact that predictive or modeling, the very fact that you inherently with the hip hop cipher have a limit to what you can predict and what you can model would not in any way whatsoever lessen the magic of the cipher when it happens. It would, you wouldn't go, oh, Daniel, you can't predict what the cipher is going to do. Cancel the cipher. It's impossible. You wouldn't look at the cipher and say, well, it's impossible then. It can't happen. Or you'd be like, well, Daniel, your model of how the cipher is possible is too general. Well, ciphers don't exist. You would never do that, right? But that's what we actually will do with spirituality or religion or mysticism or different things. All of them are models, and all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the question is which are useful or which are not. And what we're going to have to do is with these different mystical theories or notions on the liminal web that are bringing up is there's going to have to be that kind of rubric of going through of like, they're all wrong, but which ones are useful and why?
What's useful is what's most beautiful and creative and and alive. That's what's useful. That's a form of usefulness that's important, I guess, just basic practicality. But if we're talking about a higher level, if we're in the realm of, let's say, practices and things like that, what is useful is something that you can't really define. It's more like an atmosphere.
Well, the use is what makes the cipher possible, and
like
the cipher,
music.
Yes, that's correct. And use from the George Box quote.
Miles Davis and the Silent Way, something like a beautiful piece of music. It's just it doesn't speak. It doesn't have words to it. It has a resonance. It has a certain formality. It has a resonance, and it brings you deeper into existence, which is different than the kind of music that just kind of pumps you up and gives you a heart on or something. There's something different. There's levels of quality of participation.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, the thing in this situation, what's useful is what makes the cipher possible, which is outside of practical reductionism, because the cipher is that music in that. And one of the reasons why, for me, Ivan Illich is so invaluable is because he shows you that your understanding of the word use is limited to what the system tells you is useful, right? Like I would say conversations like this or on the liminal web that are not being paid for are incredibly useful in the opening of the horizon of the beautiful, the good, and the true, or the making of the fully human. And you see that's the issue is like, the problem is our understanding, arguably what Illich is showing us is that the most useful things are the things that emerge in the space of the useless, the leisure, outside of the wage space, like that of which is not reducible to quantification. And so
he even uses the word hedonism at one point, saying, okay, this is what we need. We need to break free of, but it's not a mindless mechanical hedonism either. It's more like it is more like a conversation, but a rich conversation, and with in a rich atmosphere of exchange, and maybe some grapes, rancid grapes, alcoholic beverages.
Oh, absolutely. Well, what we see here is, for me, we have to think of democracy or all of these things, or social structure, as a cipher. And what we have to define use according to is the cipher skills, the skills that make the cipher possible. And what you get
skills be able to dance in the cipher, skills that allow you to dance.
Absolutely. And so right now, what we defined as useful is relative to what makes possible a plan. We have to redefine use as what makes possible. We need to redefine use in terms of discernment, skills, preparation for the unknown. Like what is useful is that of which makes you ready for the unplannable, that of which is unexpected. But this is where Illich is so valuable for me later in life, is because he's like, oh my gosh, we can't even think that kind of use because we're so in the waters like those fish of use as defined by the system. So then he goes through history to make the case that our understanding of use and practice is all relative to this historic moment when we've been captured by the system or wage labor or et cetera, so forth. So for me, the reason what has to be done to even like ask the question, like, because for me, if the question is the possibility of discussion that doesn't fall into crude relativism, the possibility of democracy according to Cipher, and then the question of the metric by which we can determine which narrative is better than the other, then you actually have to have a rethinking of all of these different levels, even down to what you mean by use, what you mean by an organization. There's a complete wholesale transformation by everything that has to occur. Or we can't even think what Illich is pointing to. That's why Illich
it's like a kairos, which means a total transformation of all our again unquestioned certainties.
Absolutely.
Which means whatever we think about medicine and doctors, you know, we have to completely change that because it's wrong and it's criminal, you know, and mostly destructive. And whatever we think of schools and institutions, you know, it's killing people's souls. And whatever we think of you know, our sort of big religious things, that's another, you know, all of these things, right, are the Illich criticism. All of our institutions are dissolving under our feet as we speak, and need to be reinvented, recreated, re-inhabited, I guess.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, like right now, the metric by which we judge school, medicine, work, et cetera, so forth, is keep alive or keep comfortable. Well, if we take all this seriously with the cipher, what it would mean is we need to discern school, medicine, profession, et cetera, according to what makes you good at the cipher and what makes a cipher possible if we use that metaphoric structure. And that's a complete transformation.
Yeah, it would change how you do school, because what is school?
Yes, that's
like,
right.
What we think it is wrong. What is medicine? What if medicine is the art of dying, not keeping alive indefinitely? Absolutely. You know, as a sort of walking corpse. What if school is about deconstructing all of our fixed notions of reality? What if that's what education should be? You know, and you know, all of these things. There's something radically wrong about all of our human structures at the moment, and there's something, and yet within that system error is something kind of like the art of living needs to be rediscovered, as Illich would say at the end of his book, Gender, you know.
Yeah. Well, everything should be about making us good at magic, per se, in the cipher sense. Like everything should be in the business of making us good at magic.
The beauty of making magic, yeah.
Yes.
Totally
and
agree.
instead, it's in the business of making us comfortable, which if you're comfortable, why bother to do magic? And you see, so you outsource, you stop doing it, you stop being concerned about it. And then our fate becomes like, well, it would be a different subject that I won't go into. But if we look at first world nations, they tend to, if Tyler Cohn is correct, they head toward a great stagnation. We see all the mental health stuff. And it would seem like we're heading toward that rat utopia experiment where all the rats eat themselves because they're happy and comfortable. And that seems to be our fate. So if we don't figure out, you know, how to get good at magic, we're just going to end up as rats in that utopia experiment. And the thing is,
and real religion is magic, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Real religion is the act of magic, which is extremely challenging. You know, after your course, we're going to do a course with a guy named Luke Beckney, and he named his course the hard way. It's based on Gurdjieff's fourth way of the work, and Yeah, it's a hard, and joyful way,
Oh yeah.
I would say. That's what I would like to be aiming at. I don't want to make it cheap.
Well, we don't the frenemy brain doesn't like magic because you can't plan for magic. And that means it's
Yeah.
scary. And that means you could do it wrong. And what if you step into the cipher and nothing happens? The reason I also like the cipher as a metaphor is because it's terrifying. Like you're going to
Yeah.
step in, you could be humiliated. What if everyone's quicker than you? You're not ready. In order to do magic, you must face fear. You know, Alex Ebert has that line where he says the meaning of life is courage. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Courage seems to be big. Like one of the huge messages of Christianity when it's at its best is the one who fears is not made perfect in love. Like Jesus is constantly like, don't be afraid. You could argue that the greatest sin of Christianity is fear. But we've kind of lost that. And I think it's a huge problem. Like one of the worst things that ever happened is the cross stopped being scary. Like back then, if they're wearing a cross, like that's a freaking electric chair. Like you're constantly facing something terrifying. Now in Christianity, the cross is cute and Easter and nice. So it isn't this constant reminder of fear and facing fear. So it's lost its, I'm afraid for many people, it's lost its reminder of facing fear. And then of course, turning to system, dogma, prepositional knowledge is all you don't have to face your fears because you're mechanical. Causation, there's nothing to fear because causation will carry you along. Creation is one giant life of facing fear and anxiety. And you see, the thing about creation, I always like to kind of talk about Dante versus Lovecraft. The act of creation is where you don't know if you're going to run into Dante, the beatific vision, or if you're going to run into Lovecraft. You've got to be ready for whatever happens. If the great ancient ones show up, maybe when you do the creative act, you see the human effigy in the wheel and your wings fail the lofty fantasy, or you get reduced to ash because you're somewhere in Antarctica you're not supposed to be. So, this is the thing is that the creative act, if you're tapping into the apathetic, it could be Lovecraft or it could be Dante, but you need to be prepared for whatever it is because beauty can kill you too.
Yeah.
Like that's a big part for Dante. You know, he's like, Beatrix, why won't you smile at me? And he's like, well, at this level in the Paradiso, if I smile at you, the beauty will be so great that it will reduce you to ash. You'll literally be killed, Dante, because you're not ready for that level of beauty. There's something painful about beauty. Well, creation versus causation, the cipher, is a space where you're actually opening yourself to all those very strange paradoxes where beauty is like wonderful, but also can kill you, where you got to face your fear, but that's also what makes you courageous. Like you're dealing with all of these kind of ups and down, topsy-turvy things, because once you leave behind causation per se, well, then everything is topsy-turvy. Everything has this kind of contingency.
It's interesting that in the Buddhist tradition, they would call it the bardo. It's this, it's kind of an in-between space where your fears and your pleasures are magnified, or all the intensities are magnified in some sense, and the deities are usually represented either in sexual union or as gorgeous goddesses decked out in beautiful apparel, and yet they have a butcher's knife or something at the same time, or they're wrathful, fierce, and they're wearing human skulls and they represent, your greatest sort of terror, and that's supposed to represent compassion. So it's interesting, like those. So what you were saying, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about, there's on one hand, Christianity represents, there's the cross, and there's the horror of the crucifixion of the God man, and then but there's also this kind of, on the other side of that, there's this like triumphal sort of celebration at the same time. So both of those are integral to all the religious traditions, I think. On one hand, facing the darkness of the human condition head on, and on the other hand, this transcendental possibility of complete, they call it Mahasukha, great joy.
Oh no! Well, one of the things that is like it's very important for the Christian, like in Christianity, you don't see the imagery of these really weird creatures in the book of Revelation, like a lamb with a lot of eyes in its chest, or angels that are these really weird, like, I think there are versions of angels that are more human-like, but there's the, what's so interesting is when you go back to a lot of religions, the imagery is pretty unbelievable, like as a mixture of beauty and horror and strangeness. And one of the things that is probably what seems to occur is the more dogmatic religion becomes, the more its imagery becomes
sterile.
Sterile. The imagery follows. Sterile, it becomes clean and sterile. The other thing that's also, I think, a big deal that's always forgotten in Christianity that I think Illich was very aware of is Christians will talk about Good Friday, they'll talk about Easter, but really the world is more so in a kind of Holy Saturday, which is God is dead, and that's the case. You know, maybe tomorrow he comes back to life, but we're in this between space of the Holy Saturday kind of thing. And that day is where the cipher is possible. Like the cipher takes place in a Holy Saturday where you have this apophatic opening where maybe it's Lovecraft, maybe it's Dante, but we're going to condition ourselves to be ready for the Holy Saturday and to show up on the Holy Saturday to see what occurs, because that's that kind of between space. And that's where the magic happens. The magic, in a way, the magic doesn't happen on Easter because it's done. The magic happens like getting ready for the Easter, right? But you have to exist in that between space of death and hope, like meaninglessness and meaning, like nothing and apophatic. It's all about the between space. And what I really think Illich is constantly working is to force us into between spaces.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
You know, absolutely. And he's like, the only place the magic happens is the between spaces. You've got to be in the between spaces. And if we think about medicine, schooling, systems work, all about how do we cultivate human magic? And that's a lot of the game. Like so much of the meaning crisis, mental health crisis, meta crisis, all these different things have a lot to do with the capacity of humans to be magical in this sense. And if we cannot do that, that would be the rub. And I mean, to me,
because we're trying to cure everything, we're trying to fix everything, we're trying to straighten up every, you know, you're trying to put everything into a nice systematic and clean sterile space. But yeah, we've lost that weirdness that you're talking about. Yeah. In a sense, that weirdness is a threshold space. It's a doorway. It's a place where real magic happens in that threshold in between, because that's the threshold. The in-betweenness you're talking about, the strangeness, is like the threshold space is where surprising things enter and come from the outside and enter our world. And something new is birthed or brought into being. To me, that space of possibility is the space of leisure that Joseph Piper talks about. It is the useless space that Julian Buenda says the colleges are supposed to train people to be good at, but have not done that anymore in The Tyranny of the Intellectual book. That's quite good. That space is the shadow workspace that Ivan Illich is like, it's there, the system requires it, let's own it and be good at it. And you know, the thing I've been thinking about, you know, the other thing before I forget is I think Heidegger's at his best when he's this clearing, because he's kind of talking about a kind of magic. Like if you clear, if you annihilate, then being can come forth, and there's a kind of magic that can occur there. Likewise, one of the reasons perhaps Illich is not has not been read is because he's like a magic philosopher. Like he's a philosopher of these magic spaces. And it's like, that's weird, that's strange. And we're so drunk on the sterile imagery or dogmas that when you got this philosopher who's talking about a shadow work, what? Like a space outside of the economic frame, it's weird. And so we're like, I don't know that. And it's just kind of funny because it's almost like now AI is forcing us to consider these spaces that are weird, because those are the spaces that are left. You know, increasingly, that's where humans are going to be pushed. And it's very interesting,
yeah, and it does to me. You know, Raven was also saying with Frege and Owen and Dimitri on this idea that's a very religious age, actually, because of this strangeness, this fear, this anxiety.
We're moving into a religious age.
Yeah, and to me,
I think it's very strange because it's totally counterintuitive to what people think. People think we're moving into the age of, you know, of becoming more rational and becoming more scientific and becoming more, you know, all those things. but actually we're moving into a very intense religious age. I think that's absolutely true. I think we've got to come to terms with that. That all the religions that people are repressing and pushing away are, the good ones and the bad ones are coming out of these shadows you're talking about.
Well,
For good and ill. Like it's not in a way it's a celebratory statement, because I think that we are religious beings.
yes.
I think that, and without that, I think the world is flat. Absolutely flat. It's a flat land, as Wilbur calls it, or somebody calls it.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah. Well, once we understand that religion is magic in the sense that we've described it, with like the cipher, like humans die without ciphers in that sense. Humans die without magic. We do not do well. I think also Illich understood, and I think I mentioned this, Alan Bloom kind of talks about it at the end of The Closing of the American Mind. Basically, without magic, there's no friendship. Friendship dies. Community dies. All these things go away. Community tends to be strongest where people are like, let's get together and do a cipher. Let's do a festival. Let's do a parade. Let's do this thing where something magical can occur.
Exactly. Yeah.
If people are not going to go to much effort to be together if there's no possibility of magic. If all we're going to do is hang out, if all we're going to do is consume, sure, I may do it every now and then, but it won't be something that I'm eagerly looking forward to, that I really am like, oh my gosh, I got to be there because magic might happen. Friendship dies where there is no possibility of magic. It will just gradually fade away into atomization or something that we do every now and then, but it's not really deep. It will become mere association. Friendship requires magic. And Illich in that way is defending friendship.
Yep. Totally agree. And it all, as you were talking, I was thinking about how it makes me sad that people don't have a connection to magic. Like, what could be worse than that? Living in this world without magic. Why live at all? What's the point? It's just, as you say, association, conversations, jobs, various experiences, which are cool. But how empty could that, how empty, how it's just like a vast suburb. It's such an empty vision of reality. So I'm with you on the magic thing. Daniel.
Well, the meaning crisis is for me a magic crisis. Because the thing is, when you ask people, so for example, if you ask people, does your life have meaning? You get mixed answers. And the problem is too, when you ask people directly, the answer they give you is probably the least likely to be true unless they're desperate, like truly, truly desperate, or they don't care anymore, right? But if we look through, okay, so we lost connections by, he talks about the friend session. So people don't have friends. Okay, we look through and people feel separated. You have the nuclear family instead of the traditional family. People are separated. They don't feel like they have social capital. Okay, we look through, people feel like they can never get out of debt. You just kind of look through, and you also ask people, like, are you happy? Basically, and they'll say, oh yeah, I'm happy. But then they just happen to act in such a manner that suggests that they aren't, right? So you have to pay attention to these different things. And what you, I think, see overall is sociologically and socioeconomically a society of people that have lost motivation, ergo meaning in that sense, ergo magic. Because like you say, I think this is actually almost an empirical question. Do we see...
motivation is magic? I like that. I like what you mean. I like the connection between motivation and magic, because why would you have motivation if it wasn't for magical
100%
magical purposes? What would you be motivated for? Again, it's like that is what we're interested in. We are interested, what we want and what we need and what we care about is magic. And there's nothing else that we want or need or care about particularly. And everything else that we do, care about is that isn't related to magic is irrelevant. So
yeah.
Well, I like this kind of conclusion that we're coming to in this conversation.
As am I, and it's actually perfect because it sets up for the first week on Illich motivation. Because to me, motivation is magical. Because here's a pen, it's on it, and now it's lifted. Like cause and effect. I'm literally with motivation changing the direction of causation, because creation is always dressed in causation. We made that distinction earlier. Like you are literally in an act of motivation having an impact on how the world unfolds. It's like a magic trick. It's a magic trick that looks like physics. And it's just that we lose the kind of magical core behind it. Like there is absolutely, to me, something about magic that's motivational. Charles Taylor talked about how the ancient world was an enchanted world, right? And that modernity kind of loses enchantment. He talks about that in the secular age. Even Jeremy Johnson, when he was talking about Gesper on this idea in his recent, which I really enjoyed, talking about how it used to be that you saw yourself as part of the world, that you're participating in a story, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that we lost enchantment. Well, if enchantment equals magic and that equals motivation, exactly. Like what we need is to regain a kind of magic and motivation. All of these things go together, and you have to believe you're capable of magic. And so you have to make yourself believe you can do it. And something like a hip hop cipher, something that's difficult, something that requires great skill and training, the ability to actually address the stranger on the side of the road. These are things that can make you believe in your own magic, and therefore believe in the meaning of your own motivation and the possibility of that motivation giving rise to magic and different things. So I think absolutely magic and motivation can be put together. And the last thing I'll say before giving it to you, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, because I completely agree that thinking about motivation and magic together is central here. And it's like you were saying, how sad it is to think about like living life without magic and what's the point. In his book On the Right to Useful Unemployment, there's that idea that like if you build your house on your own, you're seen as a kind of deviant. Like, why wouldn't you get a professional? Why would you do it yourself? It's like immoral, right? And yet, what if we lived in a world where building your own house was, wow, that's magical. You build a house on your own. Like the very ascription to a professional class or technology removes from us the ability to have the skills that have the effect of being magical. And to me, when you live in a world where you're made to feel that if you're not paid to do X, Y, and Z, what's the point? People don't do it because if they're not being paid for it or whatever, there's no point. You're a deviant, as Illich says. What that just makes me think about, I can't imagine all of the genius, creativity, innovation, wealth, goodness that the human race could have right now if people had not been made to feel for so many years that anything they do outside of wage labor is useless. Like how much better, how much more magical would the world be if we shattered that way of thinking that Illich put his finger on? And I think that's absolutely central for us today.
Yeah, and then actually it's not just magic, but it's miraculous. It's miracles. So here I am, trumpeting religious ideas. I've talked about the divine, about magic, about miracles. All these things have been pushed out of the discourse as being archaic, somehow superstitious, backward, just. But it's the opposite is the case.
Well, 100%. Well, the mistake, we tend to say, like, if I do a card trick and you know how it works, we tend to say, oh, it's a trick. Magic is a trick. It's a deception, right? It's something that's not real. Well, hold on. Knowing how the card trick worked just shows you that you know how the magic works. It doesn't make the magic go away. The effect was very real. You were amazed when it occurs, right? Just because you know how a magic trick works, the mechanism of the manifestation of the magic, the effect, the moment of splendor in people's lives does not make the phenomenological experience of that splendor vanish suddenly. It occurred. It was there. Once we understand that, understanding the mechanisms of magic, knowing how a cipher is possible, even if we can't perfectly model it, once we understand that knowing how something works doesn't reduce its magic, then we might be a little more open to the magic and stop othering it in the way that we have as being a mere trick, because that is the reductionism that has been truly consequential. To say that magic doesn't exist if we know its mechanisms or can condition ourselves to be more open to it. No, that doesn't reduce the magic. That's rising ourselves up to the capability of making magic in the world. It doesn't make it go away. It makes it here.
Yeah. And what is, magic? I mean, the cipher, the event or the, performance or, this creative act, Oh, I was thinking as you're speaking, yes, there's that. And then there's the moment when you leave that and you are transformed and you go back into the ordinary world and you look at a blade of grass with little drops of dew on them, and it seems like the most significant thing in the world. So it isn't anything that is constructed. It's again, it's already there.
Well, that's exactly, Layman Pascal, when we talked, he was talking about the need for nutritious experiences. And I think that's exactly right. And the thing is, the experiences of magic condition us to be more capable of nutritious experiences, which then motivate us to seek more conditioning for more magical experiences, which conditions
Yeah,
us to be more capable of nutritious experience. And then you get a feedback loop going upward, per
yeah.
se, going toward
Positive
depth,
feedback loop.
a
Yeah,
positive feedback loop. And that conditioning of experience, that is what that is so much of what it means to deal with the magic crisis or the meaning crisis or the
yeah, yeah,
motivation
yeah, yeah,
crisis.
yeah, yeah,
Once
yeah,
you apprehend reality in that way, well, then you want to dance with it. And once you don't want to dance with it, well, then
yeah.
that's where the
Yeah.
magic can happen.
And it's actually really, despite everything that's happening in the world, it's quite possible to be very ecstatic, and very alive, and and you could do that. It's the thing is people feel the problem with the meaning course discourse is it's another reason for people to get depressed and feel trapped. And you could do certain things under any circumstances, which can put you into states of all kinds of intense pleasure and joy and connection and beauty and all that. Is so we have to remember that.
Absolutely. Well, to me, the key, if we talk about the meaning crisis, which I personally have no problem with discussing that because it's always
No, me
difficult.
neither.
It's always difficult in marketing or just talking in general. Like you have to find a phrase that people understand, but there's no phrase that's perfect. Some models are useful. All models are wrong, but some are useful. So there's always going to be problems. The key, though, for me to always keep in mind with the meaning crisis is that we actually do know how to give meaning. It's called xenophobia, nationalism, violence, and all these other things. Like we actually do know how to give meaning. A lot of people, unfortunately, have been getting meaning through conspiracy or strongmen or different things. The key
Yeah,
is to realize metaphorically that the meaning crisis is not, it's not us coming upon a dead end and like the door slamming behind us and we're trapped. What do we do? It's more metaphorically like the example I've given is Thomas More and The Man for All Seasons, where he knows how to leave prison. He's just got to grant the king the divorce, right? The annulment, right? But because of his principles, he refuses, right? He won't do it because it would violate it. So likewise, people who are suffering the meaning crisis easily are doing so because they refuse to go to old ways of getting meaning, like racism or xenophobia and different things. So for me, we have to see a certain nobility in the meaning crisis, where it is something that people are suffering because they're looking for a higher value. They don't want to go back to the
yeah,
banality of evil and thoughtlessness.
yeah,
And to
yeah,
me, that means the meaning crisis can be seen as people existing in a kind of negative space, a kind of clearing of possibility, waiting for the magic, waiting
sure.
for the magic to come forth. And as long as with the meaning crisis, we see in it crisis opportunity, that's perfectly fine. But we just need to realize that we do know how to give meaning. It's just that we don't want to do that because that's bad. We want to try to find a opening for something more. And the something more here would be magic. And I think, and there's a lot of reason to have hope
Because
in that
magic
magic.
is a meaning saturated field.
Yes, it is.
It's not a meaning or the meaning or and it's not a new narrative. Like you become a meta modernist and suddenly, oh, that's my meaning. I mean, that doesn't work. It's like people try to adopt these different philosophical perspectives. That doesn't work of meaning either, because meaning is I think meaning is more like an undressing process rather than putting on uh, more complicated jargon ridden conceptual attire. Was that a sentence that I just made?
I think it was actually. It was a great sentence. I think
Okay.
meaning can only be arrived at indirectly. And meaning is something that is a description of when you engage in magic practices. Like, a way to think about this as well, like when you have a really good time with friends and you look at the time, it's like, oh my gosh, 3 hours went by. Hey, it's magic. You time traveled, right? Like you have these kind of festive experiences that kind of feel magical, right? Or when you have a conversation, like I had no idea where that conversation was going to go, but wow, that was magical. Or you have the music, like I did. I helped run Unoya, which was an art gallery women's performance place, and we would do these jam offs on Thursday nights, and some of them went to like 2 a.m, and I was the pianist. And you'd be like, "How is this happening? How do we just know where the music is going?" And you just do. And the same would be when we had these kids with Cypher Tank. You'd be like, "How does it happen?" And that and this is like, to go back to what we were saying on the idea of these narratives, the liminal web narratives. The test for the liminal web narratives and the competition of narratives that are emerging is going to be which narratives are most likely to lead people to engaging in magic making practices.
Absolutely.
And those will be the narratives that are kind of, dare I say, natural selection or social selection, whatever. Those are going to be the narratives that actually will rise to the top in a good way. Whereas right now, the religious debate, because the first principles are utterly transcendent, you can't have this kind of selection process, if you will, which means democracy gets stuck and it really can't do much and then it falls apart. What you see here is with these new kind of narratives, if you grant me that language, I'm not saying, obviously Bard's narrative is based on Zoroastrianism. I'm not saying new in the sense it has no ancient grounding. But the idea is that you have the possibility of a kind of narrative selection, and the test to determine the usefulness, quote unquote, of that narrative is relative to the degree that it incubates magic making practices. And that's when you get meaning. And that's where then the meaning is second to the practices. And the practices are like magic making. And that's the ordering. Lewis, I always like Lewis, the first things first principle, when he says, if you put first things first, you get second things also. But if you put second things first, you lose both. What we see here is that meaning is a second thing from magic making practices. And humans, I use the term belonging. For me, humans as magic making entities find belonging in magic making practices. That would be the negation sublation of given releases into the address of belonging again too. I just said a mouthful, but we don't find belonging unless we find ourselves in magic. But that requires us to make and condition ourselves to create that magic and to have that space within a space, that Cora, as Derrida will say, that time within time, that space of leisure in which that can emerge. And that is when humans then go, oh, life is good. Life is magical. Life is where I want to be. So I think focusing on those magic making practices is central. And I believe Ivan Illich was very, very aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah, he called that awareness, I would say.
Yes.
But I think you've done it, Daniel. I think we've done it.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I don't know.
I'm sure that this conversation could continue for another 2 hours. I don't know if I have the mental acuity for that, but I guess every conversation, a good conversation, ends with an open-ended,
Well, it's the difference between the thoughtless sleep and the good sleep. The good sleep that comes from the kind of magic occurred in that sort of dreaming sleep that has this kind of positive, like touched by magic. So that's appropriate. You get to an end of a conversation, you're ready for the rest that has been earned versus the sleep that has been stolen because of thoughtlessness.
Exactly.
So I appreciate. Well, Andrew Sweeny, I've enjoyed this conversation. I am so thrilled that Michelle and I will be working at Parallax and are hosted there with the Ivan Illich course starting on November 4th. And it's just really a treat. All the work you're doing is wonderful, Mr. Sweeny.
And I'm looking forward. I'm going to participate in your course. So come and hang out and at this course, please sign up. It's going to be magic.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, thank you, Mr. Sweeny. I've enjoyed it very much. All the best to you, sir. So everyone sign up.
You too.
We're looking forward to it. All the best to you.